Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Okay, so today what I'm going to talk about is Sangha, or what Reverend Master Jiyu said was, she translated in the end Sangha as contrition and conversion. So over time, Reverend Master Jiyu changed words and expressions in our scriptures and ceremonies. You know, when you take a religion that originated in another culture, country, another time, it has to be translated, and some of its concepts have to be reworked so that it is rightly understood in the new culture. So, you know, originally we used Japanese words, and then we translated those, and sometimes we retranslated them. I'm sure it's still going to evolve more. When Zen Buddhism first came to the West, some things were neglected, misunderstood, or even skipped over. Master Ji used to say about Beat Zen, for some it had an overemphasis on complete freedom. So we had this complete freedom to act. And the basic fact of personal responsibility and consequences was not much considered. Okay, so that was the early days. And Reverend Master Ji said that this wasn't necessarily because the early teachers that came over from the East didn't understand the fact of personal responsibility and consequences, but actually they thought that we would have already been steeped in morality. You know, that they just assumed that. So, it took a little bit of time for some of us for what precepts mean to take hold. So this all being said, and as we know, there are cultural differences in our world, with people, with races, with nations. But when it comes down to it, we're pretty similar. And I think we all, if we live long enough, have pretty much a PhD in suffering. So we all share that we've been through a lot. Maybe slightly different forms of suffering, but still a lot of similarity. So I look back at the first edition of Selling Water by the River, which was Zen as Eternal Life. If you know anything about the story, when Reverend Master went to the book publishers and wanted to call it Zen as Eternal Life, they said, no, you can't do that, that won't sell. So she came up with Selling Water by the River. And in Selling Water by the River, Reverend Master Jiyu translates Sangha as confession. So then in later years, she would translate Sangha as contrition and conversion. So slightly different expressions. In the glossary of Zen as Eternal Life, Reverend Master renders Sangha, and Sangha is a Japanese word, as contrition, confession, repentance. Further, she says, the sincere recognition of all that is wrong with me and the acceptance of one's past karma. Sangha is the true source of religious humility and a principal gateway to enlightenment. So when we take a good look at how we have been living, usually, I mean it was for me, I'll say, it was a bit of an awakening to the karma that I was creating and really not fully recognizing, or in some instances not even noticing. So it's not that we're terrible, awful, bad people, irredeemable, you know. It's usually more a question of our unskillfulness and lack of mindfulness in our everyday lives. We're not seeing clearly and consequently leaving awake. So fortunate for us, we have our practice through formal meditation, mindfulness, and meditation in everyday life in all our activities when we get off the cushion, and through the study of our mind, our habits, other people's reactions to things that we get up to, and the precepts. Because of all these things in our practice, we can gain insight and restrain ourselves from unskillful, unperceptual thoughts, words, and deeds. We can also change thoughts, words, and deeds. It's a wonderful thing about anicca, impermanence, this basic doctrine to our practice, that there's constantly change. Things will not remain the same. So in Buddhism, contrition and conversion is not asking for divine forgiveness. Rather, it's about clear recognition of our unskillfulness in body, speech, and mind, whether intentional or unmindful. What has happened is we've got caught up in the three fires of greed, hate, and delusion, and thus acted without compassion and wisdom. With contrition and conversion, we take a good look. If something is wrong, we take ownership for our karma, our actions. We admit it to ourselves. It's a basic thing, just to see something and admit it. Take ownership of it. We make amends if that's possible for something we've done. Say we're sorry. And vow not to repeat that which is harmful again. Sometimes harm can be to ourselves. That's not a good idea either. It's not always outwardly directed, but we, strange human beings, direct harm to ourselves. So the real point in all this is doing something about that which causes suffering for ourselves and others. It's essential we forgive ourselves, that we take ownership of our karma. In this way, we don't create more and more self. Okay? It's simply the recognition of what we are actually doing. So there's, in Buddhism, the confession verse in our tradition, all the evil committed by me is caused by beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. All the evil is committed by our body, speech, and mind. I now confess everything wholeheartedly. Remember that in Buddhism, evil means suffering. So if you have problems with the word evil, you can use the word suffering. And there's another version of this verse. All wrong actions, behavior, and karma perpetrated by me from time immemorial have been and are caused by greed, anger, and delusion, which have no beginning, born of my body, mouth, and will. I now make full and open confession thereof. So, we don't in Buddhism go to a confessional to admit our wrongdoings. Usually this is an internal process. And sometimes we seek counsel from someone we trust, or we want to talk to somebody about what we've done and seek some help. There can sometimes be a good reason to talk with someone else about what we have got up to. In Buddhism, I have heard different opinions about words like remorse, regret, shame, guilt, in relation to our cleaning up our karma. Okay? Personally, I don't mind the word remorse, regret, and even shame. Okay? I think that they can have a positive connotation. Guilt, on the other hand, seems to lead down a road of self-hate and not seeing clearly what we have done. Because if we're all kind of stirred up inside about ourselves, we're not going to be seeing clearly outside of ourselves. With guilt, we can easily go into a guilt spiral, blaming self and other, and on it goes, and not actually dealing with our issues. Because how could we? We're no good, or they can't be changed. So in the early days, the Abbey, Reverend Master Jiyu had us watch the midday soap operas. We didn't watch a lot. We watched a bit of them, and pretty soon you get the theme, the point. And I think the reason why she did was to help us see some of the pitfalls of guilt. Often people in the soap operas were emotionally over the top with guilt and sorrow. they're just agonizing. But they didn't change, They didn't change their actions. They just kept doing the same thing day after day. Occasionally you have a bad person become a good person. Well, that's kind of nice. And then vice versa, and that's not so nice. Okay, but they kept making the same mistakes. So the way I see remorse and regret is that part of the consequence of unskillful behavior is that when we realize we have acted this way, we don't feel so good. I mean, it affects us. How could it not? But for remorse and regret to be helpful, we must do something about our behavior. Okay? Otherwise, it's just hot air. Sometimes this will take quite a bit of effort, and it can take time to unwind a habit. So again, I don't see a problem with the word remorse and regret. But in looking around and in checking with some of the things that Buddhist scholars that I have, that I think a lot of, I just checked around about these words, okay? And interestingly, Thanissaro Bhikkhu has an article entitled Remorse. So I thought, oh good, he's going to be saying remorse is a good term in Buddhism. But actually what he says is remorse is not an attitude or a feeling that the Buddha recommended. The Buddha recommends that if you want not to suffer from the results of past actions or past unskillful actions, you develop the Brahma Viharas, heavenly abodes. So those being goodwill or loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, sympathetic empathy, and equanimity. And in this article, Thanissaro Bhikkhu says that if you've done unskillful things in the past, note the fact, note that it was a mistake, resolve not to repeat it, and then develop the Brahma Viharas. Goodwill for yourself, goodwill for everyone, compassion for yourself, compassion for everyone, equanimity for yourself, equanimity for everyone. So it's important, as you can see there, that it's for yourself and it's for everyone. He also says that we need to work on our discernment, our heedfulness being that whatever you do will come back on you in one way or another, so you pay attention. So this is his thoughts about remorse. I still think remorse is an okay Buddhist term if taken from the aspect of admitting that you made a mistake, karmic consequence of usually not feeling so good about it, and the willingness to do something about it, make amends, change, vow not to do it again, and not do it again. Okay. So if you're interested in this article, it's online at this is Thanissaro Bhikkhu's article on remorse, because he's a Buddhist scholar. It's online at Dhamma, DHAMMA talk.org, and it's entitled Remorse. So then I went to another Buddhist scholar who I think a lot of, Bhikkhu Bodhi. And he has a Dharma teaching online called The Guardians of the World. Okay? And it means guardians in the sense that these are things that really help us and guide us. Okay? He says these two guardians are an innate sense of shame of breaking the precepts and a moral dread and fear of the results of wrongdoing. So, personally, I tend to feel sometimes a sense of shame, not guilt, but shame, okay, when I break the precepts. It's a feeling, it's an emotion. We got to use it constructively, or it can move on to guilt. And so I don't have any problem with the word shame. And my PhD in suffering can warn me that it's not a good idea to do certain things, that they have consequences. If we just, over time, if we if we reflect, we see these things over and over again, and they give us the opportunity to get insight into them and say, no, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't have a good consequence. I'll just restrain myself. So, if you find these words, remorse, regret, shame, or recognition of possible consequences to be positive tools to convert wrong actions, behavior, and karma, I would use them. I mean, but somebody, I don't know, people say, people can quote the Buddha in certain ways, translate the Buddha in certain ways, and it's totally right, but we may find something helpful. Okay. So the real important factor is not to get enmeshed in guilt, self-blame, and a negative, despairing mind. Okay. And to remember that in darkness there is light. We just have to look up, be honest with ourselves, vow to change, and actually work on changing ourselves. And why not use the tools that we have? But it's turning them towards the positive that makes all the difference, and not using them to lay a trip on ourselves and view the world negatively. So thank you.
I am going to talk about 3 precepts, 3 of the 10 grave precepts, and relate them to our meditation practice. And I think this will work very nicely with what Reverend Master Daishin has been talking about. Dogen said somewhere, at some point, I can't remember where, study in detail. And applying that quote to this retreat, what was he talking about? What was he how do meditation and precepts enable us to study in detail? And I would say that when we meditate, we open up ourselves to watching our minds. And this in turn helps us to see how we break the precepts. So, studying the precepts in details, studying them in detail, enables us to recognize that we see in our minds, our mind states, our habitual patterns, our thoughts, and conversations we have internally, which often are breaking the precepts. So, or leading us to actions to help break the precepts. And this is very helpful, both of these. They work together. When I was a new lay practitioner, I read Reverend Master Jiyu's commentary on the Kaiuju Kaimon every day. And this was such a profound commentary that honestly I didn't understand most of what I was reading. And still, it was very helpful to read those every day. At that time, there were no other books around, and actually now I know of 2 others that I would recommend highly. Daido Lori's Invoking Reality, which is about the precepts, and also Rev Anderson from Zen Center about being upright. So I find both those books also helpful. And for me, her commentary is the most profound commentary on the precepts I've ever come across, and I find it really helpful. Because the truth is, when we begin to study the precepts and read them and think about them, they enter into us. And as Reverend Master Daishin was talking about, they enable us to recognize and be mindful of what our actions are doing, and then opening ourselves up to a regret if we're harming someone, and allowing for the conversion. For me, when we meditate, and we actually begin to see how our minds are working. This is where meditation gets to be fun. Though in all honesty, when I first started watching my mind in detail, I kind of went, oh my God. And, oh, I'm crazy, totally insane. No, you're not. Everybody has minds like this. This is what I was told. So, but as we accept that and begin to train with it, we start to see that we have the same habitual thoughts over and over again, or the same view of something over and over again, or the same story we tell ourselves over and over again. And instead of being terrified and depressed about that, if we actually start to use it and say, oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Isn't that interesting? That lightens it up, and it becomes kind of like detective work, where we're beginning to see what the little mind's doing to create the crimes. So, but seriously, what we're seeing is that the mind, where the mind creates harm, both to ourselves and to others, and this is invaluable. You know, the other advantage of seeing how fraught our minds are is that it opens us to a deep sympathy. First of all, to people who are mentally ill, because we understand, oh my goodness, this is what it's like to live with a really crazy mind, and we can be in deep sympathy with them. But also, it enables us to see how the mind can be poisoned, our mind and others' minds, by, racial hatred, or hatred of other religions, or all the various conspiracy things that go on. And it's actually a poisoning of the mind. And we ourselves can be subject to it. And this isn't something that's just happening in our lifetime. Shakespeare, when he wrote, a number of his plays were on this very thing about the poisoning of a mind. And certainly the play Othello, which I have never seen performed, but I know about, that was an example where Othello's mind got poisoned by someone who kept telling him things that were not true, and then he ended up going insane. So I think this is really good for us to recognize, and as Reverend Master Daishin was talking about, when we take responsibility, when we own our actions and our thoughts, we can begin to see how we're participating in the harm that goes on in the world. And then we can come back and bow to it and do better. Now, what I'd like to do for this brief talk is to talk about the three of the 10 grave precepts. And I'd like to show how they flow within our heart and mind and help us to cease from harming others. So the three I'm going to talk about, they are interrelated. They are refraining from speaking against others, refraining from being proud of yourself and devaluing others, and refraining, the last one is refraining from defaming the three treasures. So I'm talking about these. These are the big speech ones, although, as I've mentioned before, those of you who have been to my Dharma talks, much of the precepts are about speech, because they're about lying, speaking against others, being proud of ourselves. These are really toxic to social harmony. So these are really helpful precepts to concentrate on. I remember Reverend Master Jiu saying on a Dharma talk she was giving that when she first started teaching the monks about the precepts, and they would take a precept and work on it, and she took the precepts, do not speak against others. And she said by the end of the day, no one was talking. So it's quite common. We all participate in it, and it takes what Reverend Master Daishin was talking about that seeing it and then going, oh, there I am. I'm saying something against another person. And why is that so harmful? Well, I think we all know, because it harms the other person. It doesn't see the value of the other person. It doesn't see the value of their preciousness, their Buddha nature. And it opens us instead to a very negative pushing away, separation. And the truth of the matter is we're not separate. We're connected. And oftentimes the things we're speaking about against another person are the very things we ourselves need to work harder on. So I find it's very helpful when we start turning in and saying, well, why am I talking about that? Why am I saying that about another person? It's often because we're angry or we want things to be different or we're afraid of something. And it's really ourselves we need to turn in and look at and work with. So these are very important precepts for me. The same thing with pride. Speaking against others is a form of inadequacy. It's feeling that we want to denigrate someone rather than value them, see their preciousness. And being proud of ourselves actually is, again, the same thing of the inadequacy pride. We're trying to puff ourselves up into something that actually we're not. Everybody's connected. Everybody's equal within the Buddha nature. And as it says in the scripture of great wisdom, form is only pure, pure is all form. There is then nothing more than this. I find this really important, that everything is just Buddha. So these are the winds when we break these precepts. These are the winds that kind of blow us around and crash us into other people and into other situations. And when we stop listening to them, when we stop acting on them, then our heart begins to open to other people. And this opening brings us over and over to the Buddha nature and our trust, or entrusting ourselves to it. And that's the beauty, I think, of refraining, is that that refraining creates a little space that then can widen and we can open up to. And sometimes not speaking against others involves nothing more than just keeping our mouth shut. The steam may be coming out of our ears, but the benefit of keeping our mouth shut is very wonderful. And sometimes when we don't keep our mouth shut, but we're watching, sometimes I watch myself and I say, oh, why are you talking like that? That's not who you really are. And so that recognition, that's studying in detail. That's allowing ourselves to see and be disturbed by what's going on. And even though it feels terrible, there's something really good about it. And over the years, I've learned to just be kinder to myself when I speak in ways I'd rather wish I didn't. I can be kinder, because that gets me to a place then where I can start refraining again. Daido Loori says in Invoking Reality, when you realize in your life that cause and effect are one, you realize that what you do and what happens to you are really the same thing. And then Reverend Master Jiyu in the Kairju Kaimon commentary says, how can there be devaluation of others if they are the temple of the Lord? How can there be pride if all possess equally within the Lord? Precepts are about us, as Reverend Master Daishin said, stepping up to the plate, about us taking responsibility for our thoughts and actions. And meditation is the compassion that flows through this process, helping us see clearly that our daily practice, look what you're doing. and be and open to that. And when we open to that, then we begin to change. Now, sometimes when we follow the precepts, when we're following our hearts, it can put us in situations where we feel exposed, alone, outside the norm. It's okay. It's okay to feel that. You know, we are social animals, and this kind of creates a fear or disturbance if we're maybe stretching that social boundaries, those social boundaries of what's acceptable and what isn't. And this is where I think aligning ourselves with our intention is really helpful. Are we trying to refrain from doing harm? Are we trying to do good for others? And are we willing to look at our own hearts? And that process, that's kind of distilling what's going on, enables us, that's using our meditation in a sense, to follow the precepts. Because if we have a sense that something's good to do and we're willing to take the consequences that we could be wrong, but that we want to follow these precepts, and that's the most important thing, then sometimes we will do things that may be unappreciated by someone, but not harmful. Okay? There's a difference there. And of course, meditation also helps us, when in hindsight, look back at things and just kind of see, well, could I have said this better? Could I have done it better? And that is to me, that's why you can't just follow precepts, or you can't just meditate. They actually blend into each other in a really important way. As Reverend Master Jiu said, to do something but by ourselves without copying others is to become an example to the world, and the merit of doing such a thing becomes the source of all wisdom. Now, you know, if you've been to a number of my Dharma talks, I'm often talking about people who have done really amazing things in very difficult situations. And it's that I appreciate that. I appreciate the good that can come from one person, sometimes taking great risks to themselves in order to help other beings. But actually it occurs on a very micro level too. Sometimes someone will be kind to us just in our daily life in a simple way, or sometimes we will be kind to someone else. And that exchange of kindness, that is as profound as the big example. And those little examples occur all the time in our life. And this is what our practice is about. Whether it's another person we're helping, or an animal we're helping, or the world we're helping, it all does the good for the world. It all has the benefit for us all. Now, not defaming the three precepts, which is what I was reading about from Reverend Master Jiu. It's one of my favorite precepts, in part because it applies to both self and others. And when I say that, oh gosh, there I go, you know, but how do we talk to ourselves? What do we say about ourselves? And how do we hold ourselves in a way that is not speaking against ourselves? And honestly, I struggle with this. I have a lot of karma, habitual patterns of negating myself. And I work constantly to say, oh, look what you're saying. Look what you're doing. I had something that happened that was really funny. I was in a room with another monk, and I called and left a message to myself. And the monk said, who were you talking to? Who were you leaving that message to? And I said, it was myself. And she said, you were so kind. And I said, yes, I'm really working on trying to be kind to myself. And so, you know, it occurs in the littlest ways, but I think these things are really important. And for myself, and I don't think I'm alone with this, for myself, it's really important to work on it, because I think we are hard on ourselves. and the kinder we can be to ourselves, the more we can see what we did that's wrong or needs improvement, but it's not this punishment or blame. Now, if we're kind to ourselves, it's also easier for us to be kind to others. And if we're not criticizing ourselves, then it helps us not to criticize others. And I think the not criticizing others is so helpful in the sense that it expands our view. We get the sense, oh, I could see this differently. Oh, maybe this person is doing something that I don't understand, and open ourselves up to it. Reverend Master Jiyu says in her commentary under this precept, do not criticize the way of another. Do not call it into question. Look within and see the Lord. So I think that's true for ourselves. Again, it's this working on it for ourselves and for others. And sometimes when we act or don't act, or when someone acts or doesn't act, it can be different than what is how the world thinks or someone thinks. And are we willing, if our intention is good, to have the courage to just be still with that and not be afraid of that disapproval? You know, Master Jiyu said that Zen training is for spiritual adults, and I find that that I'm still trying to grow up, and that's what it's talking about. You know, okay, grow up. You can be kind to other people. You cannot judge other people. You cannot judge yourself, and to hold that. And sometimes it's really, really hard work, and it takes a long time to work through it. So. Really, the training of precepts in our meditation is really just that. It's that hard, wonderful work of seeing our habitual patterns and continually letting them go. And honestly, sometimes I have periods in my own training when I can really do that, and when I can do that, and I see the Buddha nature in other people, in other animals, and it's wonderful. And then other times I'm slogging through this really muddy stream of criticism, and that's my work. And I think, well, what karma did I inherit? And from many lives, I'm sure, of people who do this. And we are all bodhisattvas to our own karma. And we're all trying to work on these very things where we're opening ourselves up to the Dharma. And the precepts are our guides, and our meditation is our heart. It's the flow that runs through these precepts. There's this beautiful back and forth exchanging. And you know, as it says, when we look with the eyes of a Buddha, we will see the heart of a Buddha. And that's for ourselves and others. That's that continual looking forth. And of course, seeing the Buddha nature is really what life is all about. It's being willing to see the Buddha in all things. And so much of our suffering comes from our selfishness, from our separation, from our distorted views. And that's why I love training, is because as soon as you see that, you can drop it, you can let it go. Oh, there it is. Oh, there's my friend, criticism, coming to show me what my mind is doing. You know, and to me, the shifting of seeing these things as part of our practice, it's so simple and so freeing. And yet, sometimes it's just darn hard work, and we just have to do that. And thus, to me, this is the melding. This is why we are saying in this continuing practice, retreat, meditation and precepts, that they are blending together, and they are not separate from each other. They flow back and forth.